This happened when I was 6, around 20 years ago, and I still remember it vividly because I haven't gone more than a couple of months without replaying it in my head. I remember waking up from a creepy dream, and I was lying in bed for a minute. Then my mom opened my bedroom door. I could see her silhouette. I immediately assumed that she was there to comfort me. She didn't say anything. She then nearly walked into my room and started looking a little more creepy. She looked a little different, like sort of some creature of some sort. I could only see the dark outline of her body and head, but her hair appeared messy and her head looked larger than normal. I was on the top bunk and my baby sister was asleep below. My mom stood at my bed. Her head was about level with my own. She stood there for a minute at the side of my bunk bed, and I could begin to sense that something was wrong. She then reached out and started tickling me a little. I wasn't freaked out quite yet. Then I began to feel uncomfortable, but the tickling intensified. She began grunting quietly, almost as if she was murmuring something. Finally, I was trying to tell her to stop, but of course, words were impossible to form. The tickling kept intensifying until she was scratching, jabbing and digging at my torso. By then, the grunting had eventually grown into a deep growling and howling. I couldn't move or make any noises. What was on my mind at this point was the fact that my little sister wasn't waking up to come help me. My mom, or whatever that thing was, casually turned around and walked towards the door and closed it. I immediately woke up to realize that my sister wasn't on her bunk bed. Turns out there was no one in the house but me. Till this day, that was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. Similarly, during one of the darkest times in my life, I awoke in my room to a feeling of great pressure and a sense of evil. It sounds cliched and difficult to describe, but a really thick, heavy energy in the air which instinctively told me that there was some kind of malevolent presence in close proximity to me. It was in the middle of the afternoon, so there was enough light to really get a good look. I was in a state described as mind awake, eyes open, but my body was paralyzed. After staring in anticipation and horror for what seemed like a few minutes, at the entrance of my bedroom door, it came. I saw a figure struggling to walk through the doorway. It was a very old woman. She had sunken eyes with long grey hair and skinny to the point that the skin looked barely attached to the bones. She was naked. Her ribs were sunken in. A sense of complete dread overwhelmed me as I saw this woman make her way awkwardly towards me. I could feel a definite sexual component to it. It took every ounce of strength and willpower to shake myself awake as this thing made its way halfway on top of me. Very much like the way Dementors were depicted, sucking out the life of people in Harry Potter years later. It began as a struggled whimper, and with great effort, I managed to let out a roar. Waking up consisted of me being given back control of my body, and the woman vanished. It was a seamless transition. Everything else remained the same. A feeling of dread remained for a short while before withdrawing. I was unnerved at the time, wondering if I'd simply lost the eyes to see this thing in my awake state, and had a cold shower in an attempt to get rid of the putrid feeling that I was left with. This incident happened over a year ago. I had recently lost my job and I was going through the hardships of COVID-19 lockdown. It was difficult to get a job, and I decided to go visit my grandma's house just to get some fresh air. On my first week there, one night, I had decided to go to bed early. I woke up in the middle of the night, struggling to breathe. It took me around 10 seconds, because I literally had to start practicing how to breathe, just so I can breathe normally again. I finally caught my breath, and decided to sit out the rest of the night, until I fell right back to sleep. Nothing happened, or at least until the following night. Once again, I had decided to go to bed early. I woke up in the middle of the night to my dark room. Everything seemed okay, until I realized that there was no light coming into my room from my window. I tried to raise my head and check, but I couldn't move my body. At that moment, I could hear some humming coming from the back of my head, walking slowly around the back of my head to my side. Judging from the color of the hair, it looked like an old woman. She continued humming as she stayed away from me. I could only see her back and long grey hair and blankets that she was covered in. She looked a bit homeless. The humming suddenly stopped, and within a blink of an eye, her whole head was now faced in my direction. Her red eyes looked right into mine. I began yelling and cussing as I jerked my body in an attempt to gain control of my whole body. But there were no sounds coming out of my mouth. I couldn't even move my lips. I instantly woke up and jumped out of my bed. My body was still trembling in fear, and for a brief 5 minutes straight, I couldn't say a word. This felt real. This was real. I immediately told my grandmother about this. By the way, I am African. So growing up, we were told stories about evil entities and practices like witchcraft. It weighed heavy on me when one day I was walking out of my grandmother's house to a nearby store and saw an old lady on a wheelchair sitting on the porch and just staring at me. She looked exactly like the one that appeared in my dream just a couple of nights before. I told my cousin about this, and he told me about some village rumors that the old woman was quite known for witchcraft, and joked about how she might have just been testing the waters with me, since she's never seen me around the village before. We both eventually laughed it off. I'm not much of a believer in ghosts and witchcraft, but I know what I saw and felt that night. Whatever it was real, and to this day, I don't know what it or she wanted from me.